The two functions that we have studied extensively in Math 1 this year are linear functions and exponential functions. So we're asked here to find an exponential function of the form y equals a times b to the x. This is there's two variables in this equation, x and y. A and b are parameters. The parameter a is equivalent to the 0th term in this sequence, and b is my multiplier. It's what I continue to multiply by as I proceed down this sequence. So each increase in x multiplies by another b. Now this problem, I'm not trying to, I didn't pick this one because I thought it was, I wasn't trying to pick something that's overly complicated, but I didn't want to pick one that's really simple either. So we can kind of look at, the worst case scenario of what we have to do. If you've got x values that are right next to each other, 2 and then 3, it's easy to figure out what b is the multiplier. In this case, it's a little bit more involved. So we'll look at maybe perhaps one or two different ways of doing that. What I like to do is kind of start with the table of values and just kind of see where I'm at. So you can see I've got x's and I've got corresponding y outputs. And I don't know anything about 0 or 1, but I do know that when I put 2 into this function, it produces 144. I don't know anything about 3, 4, or 5, not 0 again, 3, 4, or 5. But I do know when I multiply, when I input 6, I get an output of 729. So there's a couple values that I have here, and if it was just those two values, this could be a linear function as well, but they're asking me to find an exponential function that behaves this way, that goes through these 2 points, so that's what we're going to do. Now, I know that there's some multiplier by b, and I don't know what it is, but I do know that if I take 144 and I multiply by b 1, 2, 3, 4 times, I would get 729. So that gives me a real simple equation, right, with some insight in order to figure out what b is. So what we're saying here is if we take the number 144 and we multiply by 4 factors of b, 1, 2, 3, 4, or I could write it as b to the 4th power, I will get 729. Now I could isolate b to the 4th, for example, right? B to the 4th power has to equal 729 divided by 144. And also we've discussed how do you calculate the 4th root. So it is a matter of, you could kind of guess and check and see if you can get some things that are there. But what I like to use at this point, especially with something like a 4th power or a 3rd or a 2nd power, is my calculator. So on the TI 8084 Plus, right, if you want to calculate the 4th root of something, the thing that you do is you begin by entering the number 4. It would be helpful to turn it on. So enter 4 because I want the 4th root of something. Then I'm going to press the math button. And once I do that, you can see way down here, option number 5 is the xth root of something. So I'm going to press option 5, or I can go down until I get to that option. And then I can press enter. So I'm going to do the 4th root of, now the 4th root of 729. So you can see I've opened parentheses, divided by 144, close parentheses. Now when I do that, I get exactly 1.5. So the 4th root of 729 over 144 is 1.5. What that means is that that's exactly what b is, right? B is equal to 3/2 or 1.5. And I can verify that by starting, in fact, I kind of enjoy doing this. I could start with 144 and I can multiply times 1.5, that's one of them, times 1.5, that's 2, times 1.5, that's 3, times 1.5, and that's 4. And you can see I did land exactly at 729. So I know exactly what b is. I'm multiplying by 1.5 each time, and as I multiply, that's terrible looking, as I multiply by 1.5 each time, I do move to new terms in this sequence. Now the other parameter that I need is, what's my 0th term, right? Where do I begin? Well, if I'm moving forward by multiplying by 1.5, I can definitely figure out what the first and then the 0th term is by dividing by 1.5. And actually that's what I'm going to do, and I'll actually use the calculator. So I'm going to take 144 and I'm going to divide that by 1.5. And that gives me that 96 is my first term. And I'm going to take that and divide by 1.5. And that gives me that 64 is my 0th term. So at this point, I know my two parameters. My parameters are A is 64, right? My 0th term is 64. And what I'm multiplying by is 3/2. So the equation is y equals 64, that's my 0th term, times 3/2 raised to the x power. So I think we'll just leave it at there. That's a decent technique. It'll always work for you, and it does let us use the power of our calculators to figure out different roots. Um,